welcome to the Business Intercept. Got a bit of a story update on the story I did yesterday regarding the mandatory order that Mayor Demings here in Orlando, Florida has instituted for all the surrounding areas, for all visitors to Orlando. Everybody's supposed to wear a mask, and of course, as I detail in that particular segment, there's some nebulousness, shall we say, about the legality of that. This is the Business Intercept. You didn't find the wrong channel. We're not dedicated to, doing anything about politics. However, in this day and age, very often public policy intrudes upon and affects the economy, both nationally and locally, which is why I'm doing this story. It's an example, as I mentioned in the other video, in the other segment, of how local politics can affect your local economies, and what's happening here is a microcosm, if you will, of what may be happening in your own town, your own city, your own state. So last week, the mayor instituted a order where everybody has to wear a mask, both in public, in stores. There are a few exceptions, certain governmental employees. Obviously, if you're at a restaurant eating, you can't very well eat with a mask on your face. And if you're exercising, particularly in the Florida heat, you don't want to be trying to wear a mask and be running around, walking, or doing anything strenuous. You will literally pass out from the heat and lack of oxygen. However, there has been a little movement on this issue because today a gentleman had a press conference, and there is now a lawsuit that has been filed in Orlando against the mandatory order. So we're just going to update you on that and again spin out what the implications may be, because as you'll see as we go through this, it's not just happening here, like I said, and it does have implications elsewhere. So what I'm going to do is let me just go over here, smooth that over there. All right, so I picked this up, floridapolitics.com. Obviously, they focus in on politics, but this really has, I'm not really going to get into the Democrat versus Republican viewpoint of this. It's not really pertinent to what it is that we're discussing here. Okay, so 3 Central Florida conservative Republicans, Representative Anthony Sabatini, John Stenberger, and Charles Hart, filed a lawsuit Monday challenging Orange County Mayor Demings' executive order that everyone wear face masks in the public. Sabatini, who was also president of the Florida Family Council, and Hart, who was chairman of the Orange County Republican Party, but who has joined the suit as co-counsel, saying he's doing so as an individual and not on behalf of any party. Okay, so that's just the basic information on this, but really let's get down to the heart of this. Scroll down here. In an interview, Hart, a lawyer, called the order massive government overreach and contended it is a violation of the right to free speech. At a press conference in Orlando Monday, Stenberger, counsel in the suit, charged that Demings' order is not clear and, among others, leave church pastors wondering if they too must wear masks while preaching. So that gives you the general gist of it. The reality, though, is that's what he's saying. What does the actual lawsuit say? And that's what we really want to kind of get into, what the lawsuit actually says. So I brought this up. I'm going to hit record. And okay, so you can go through all of the paperwork, but we'll get down here to the primary. Okay, so here's the actual lawsuit and all of the legalese that's in here. We're not going to go through all of that. The thing that matters most is on what legal basis is the lawsuit making its argument about. That's really what matters. And as it states here, Orange County Emergency Order 2020-23 is first unconstitutional because it violates the privacy clause of Article 123 of the Florida Constitution. Article 123 of the Florida Constitution states, every natural person has the right to be let alone and free from governmental intrusion into the person's private life except as otherwise provided herein. The explicit constitutional right of privacy listed in the Florida Constitution embraces more privacy interests and extends more protection than the right of privacy provided under the Due Process Clause of the federal Constitution. The emergency order is a radical infringement of the reasonable and legitimate expectation of privacy that most Floridians expect to have over their own body and facial autonomy. Further says the emergency order is also unconstitutional because it violates the Due Process Clause of 1-9 of the Florida Constitution, which reads, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. I'm not really sure how that intersects with the mask. That seems like that's a bit of a stretch, but we'll continue because he does put in a precedent here. No versus the state. The emergency order is arbitrary and unreasonable, and the emergency order is not backed by a compelling state interest or any facts proving such an interest. The original basis for the state of emergency in Orange County, which resulted in the issuance of Orange County emergency order, was to reach a goal of flattening the curve of new hospitalizations resulting from COVID-19. The curve has been successfully flattened, and a new mask mandate bears no relationship to this goal. Due process of law protects against the legislation, deprivation of life, liberty, and property, and the emergency order deprives plaintiff of his liberty. Plaintiff has also been deprived of substantial due process by way of the Orange County's interference with his private action and personal liberty. Now, on this part, this is probably what he means, because clearly telling you to wear a mask is literally interrupting your life, like he's saying. But where he's trying to make the argument, I believe, is that by putting forth an order that has not gone through the courts and has not been litigated or turned into legislation, then they can't really say that it's a legitimate order. I mean, you haven't had due process unless somebody in the public interest has gone through that fight. And representatives in both the Florida House and the Florida Senate, that's where that due process, I imagine, would occur, in the sense that they're the public's representatives. And if they're hashing it out back and forth and a new law is passed, well, then due process has been somewhat emulated there. Again, I'm hoping actually that I'll get a chance to speak with this gentleman and interview him. I've reached out to his office today to see if I can set up something tomorrow or the day after to get a little bit more clarification on the specifics of this particular argument, because if it's not in the direction in which I just explained, then it seems like a pretty weak argument against what the state's trying to do. The first argument is a much stronger argument in terms of our ability to decide what we want to do. As we move down here further, let me just go back here on 14 of this. An additional reason the emergency order is unconstitutional and violates the due process clause of the Florida Constitution is because it is void for vagueness. The emergency order leaves all significant terms undefined. Due process is violated when a statute forbids or requires the doing of an act in terms so vague that men of common intelligence must necessarily guess at its meaning. The emergency order reads the following: every person working, living, visiting, or doing business in Orange County is required to wear a face covering consistent with the current CDC guideline while in any public space. Multiple terms here remain undefined, such as public place, living, or visiting. And that's exactly right. Like, there's not a lot of people who are literally coming from out the country right now, but for those who are and didn't bring a mask, what are they supposed to do? Also, public place. So if I'm walking around in the park, do I have to wear a mask out in the 98 degree with 60% humidity? I mean, that doesn't seem right. So there's some vagueness there for sure, and it's something that they're going to have to clean up. Now, I think part of the problem with this particular clause would be that it opens the door for the mayor and his legal team to go back and give specifics and then take that reason off the table when they reissue the order, and now you've kind of lost a leg to stand on. But it continues. One last thing. Additionally, the emergency order is unconstitutional because it violates the Equal Protection Clause of art, which reads, all natural persons, female and male alike, are equal before the law and have inalienable rights, among which are the right to enjoy and defend the life and liberty, to pursue happiness, to be rewarded for industry, etc. However, in the emergency order, government employees are exempt from wearing masks. No difference of risk or exposure or infection exists between those required to wear masks and government employees, but arbitrarily require only a portion of the population to comply with the mask mandate. Orange County treats similarly situated people and businesses differently and places unique burdens on some businesses and not others without justification. Now, I hope I really do get a chance to speak with Mr. Stenberger because, again, that last point also seems kind of weak to me. Here's the reason. It's pretty specific that the mask is for anybody. It doesn't matter whether it's male or female. So I'm not exactly sure how any of that I don't see how that particular clause is violated by the order. It seems to me that the strongest ways to fight this particular order are A, there's already a law on the Florida Statute 876, which I went over in the beginning in the last video. And that states basically that nobody over the age 16 is allowed to wear a mask in the streets, in the stores, in alleyways, any place if it's obscuring most of their face. It's literally against the law. Now, that's a law, like other laws, that law enforcement or the mayor can decide arbitrarily to not enforce. We kind of see this in other areas, for instance, when it comes to immigration. There's federal immigration law about what cities are supposed to do when somebody who is illegal has been arrested. They're supposed to contact ICE, and many cities across the country have decided not to do that. Even though the law states that, they're arbitrarily deciding to not enforce that law. What they can't do, or rather what a mayor of any city in Florida cannot do, is create a new law that negates what's in the state's constitution and the state's laws. Only the legislature can do that. So what does this really mean overall? Well, here's the thing, and Mayor Demings did talk a little bit about this in the press conference that he had today. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend that as they kept me outside of that, waiting for me to get some further press credentials for them. But his thing was fines. If there are complaints from individuals about a location, probably a restaurant or bar or some other public gathering, where people aren't wearing masks, then he could essentially sic the public health officials on them and fine the business. And this is where it gets tricky, and this is why it's on this particular channel. As I kind of alluded to in the first video about this issue, is as we are trying to reopen the economy, we want as few encumbrances to people going in and conducting business or running their business or going out and about shopping as possible. We need to do that because we need the jobs back. We need the economy growing. I mean, it's bad for people to die from COVID, yes. It's also bad for people not to be able to pay their bills as a result of COVID. And any help from the government, both federally or any help from state and local governments, are only small bites. People can't really live and rely on that help for the long term. So we have to get the economy going. We have to get the business going. And the lifeblood of each city is local business. It's nice that we have Amazon and Walmart and Best Buy and Home Depot and all these other places that are really big, have cash reserves, have systems in place where people can order online and get it sent to their house. But that doesn't carry the economy in your location. It's a combination of those types of companies and your everyday mom and pop shops, your restaurants, your bars, your retail shops. That's where the money is really flowing locally. So if someone's going into a business and they don't want to wear a mask, well, they have to either decide to get into an argument with the business owner or just not argue and leave. And now the business owner either loses business because they're arguing, trying to make the person wear a mask, or they lose business because the person just decides they're not going to, leaves their establishment and decides to go on the internet to buy it. Further, and this is where the mayor might be using a bit of a stick on people's heads, is fines from the local health department. So as I mentioned in the last video, I went into a grocery store called Fresh Market this past weekend, and I wasn't wearing a mask. And I looked at the manager and said, look, the mayor doesn't really have the authority to require anybody to wear a mask, so I don't know what to tell you. And his response was, I understand that, but if you don't, I'm the one that gets fined, not you. And that's where I think mayors, governors, and city councils are really going to try to bend the arm of local businesses, because while the mayor and the public health department cannot mandate masks for everyday, citizens that live in Orange County, they can require businesses to have this type of mandate in place for anyone coming into their establishment. Per business licensing, public health, they've got full autonomy as far as my understanding of the law to do that for businesses. So basically what ends up happening is we have a situation where a business can be fined because citizens who are not required to follow this order decide not to follow it. So businesses are caught in a hard, kind of in a hard place right now because they need to get their, sales back up. They need to get their employees back to work. They need to get their business, growing and moving again. But they've got to worry about their employees getting sick if they're worried about transmission, and they got to worry about a mayor who was trying to force an outcome in any way that he can, using the power of government to try and get people to do something, okay? And he's not alone. There are, people all around the country that are doing this. A look at this story from Fox News. In California, local officials across California balk at Newsom's face order mask order. They won't enforce it. So here again, we have a governor making an order, and some officials are basically said they're not going to do it. So I'm not going to read this whole thing. It's not really necessary, but we're going to go down to his tweet here. You are required, in capitals, to wear a mask in public spaces. We're seeing too many people with faces uncovered. Wearing a face covering is critical for keeping people safe and healthy, keeping businesses open, and getting people back to work. So that's what the governor's saying. However, there are, at the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office, they announced the following. Due to the minor nature of the offense, the potential for negative outcomes during enforcement encounters, and anticipating the various ways in which the order may be violated, it would be inappropriate for deputies to criminally enforce the governor's mandate, the Sheriff's Office said in a news release. Accordingly, the Sheriff's Office will not be doing so. Rather, we will continue to operate in an educational capacity in partnership with the County Health Office. So what we have here, again, is a situation where the governor wants to do something. Local officials are deciding that they're not going to enforce it, at least in Sacramento. But in other counties in Florida, which are a little bit more stringent, they may be encountering. So what you could have here, economically speaking, is a seesaw where you go from one place to the other. So I'll give you an example again here locally, because I think it's a microcosm of what is happening across the country. Orlando has adjacent counties. I live in a county called Seminole. All right, in Seminole County, there is not a mandatory face mask order right now. So basically, I was walking around in the stores and nobody bothered me about it. Okay, but if I go down, 5-6 miles, and to the point where I pass over into Orange County, then we have the order. Okay, so Seminole County might get more sales because people don't have to worry about it. Or people who live in Seminole will wait to go to the grocery store, wait to go to Home Depot on their side of town when they happen to be in Orange County, rather than doing it when it's more convenient wherever they happen to be at the time. Overall, that doesn't affect that's a net positive or even, if you will, for the economy for Florida as a whole. But of course, Orange County needs its own sales receipts and growth and what have you. We're seeing that in other states. So for you, what does that really mean? Well, if you're a business owner, you're going to have to make a decision. Are you going to comply with whomever happens to be saying this in your own state or city? Or are you going to fight it in some form or fashion? Attach your name to a lawsuit, go to the press, do some sort of a protest where you get a little bit of news attention to allow and let public officials know that you're not a big fan of these orders. It's going to be tough. And before we close out the segment, there's something I kind of want to go over because it has a larger macro effect on what's going to happen next. And again, all of this is happening because there's been an increase in COVID cases. There is a real debate and argument right now as to whether or not that increase, both here in Florida and around the country, is because of increased testing, or is it because of increased infection rates? Okay. The evidence, for the most part, is leaning toward it just being more, people are getting more testing. And I say that because earlier, as the pandemic started, most of the people who were getting tested were older, 50, 55, 60 and up. People in their 20s and early 30s weren't really getting tested. Now they are. And as a result, you're seeing that the average age of the person who's been tested and classified as infected has gotten lower and lower in terms of age. Okay. The other thing is that I can only speak to my location, and it's anecdotal to be sure, but I went to the doctor a few days ago for nothing that had anything to do with COVID. I have no symptoms or anything else, but the doctor was pretty insistent on wanting to test me. Now, that's just one story, but I have to imagine if they're doing that to me when I have no symptoms whatsoever and what I'm there to see them about doesn't have anything to do with related with any one of the symptoms for COVID-19, you have to believe that it's happening in other doctors and other health places as well. As testing has expanded, obviously more people and who are there for other reasons are getting tested and finding out, oops, I've got COVID, or oops, I had COVID. I think that's what's going on. But here's the important part. And it's important to take a listen to this particular segment on Fox News Sunday.
Important to put this into context. And Daniel Bornstein, the former librarian to Congress, once said, the greatest obstacle to discovering the shape of the earth, the continents, and the oceans was not knowledge, but in fact the illusion of knowledge. And I think that what we have here today is we're not sure what's happening. We have 22 states where we have cases increasing, 8 where it's level, and 21 states where it's decreasing. And I think that what we're really talking about here now is what does reopening do? What did the protests do? And we just have to be humble and say we're in an unsure moment right now what's happening in this country.
Now, some people, Doctor, have suggested that the reason we're seeing more cases is because we're doing more testing, but it isn't just new cases. I want to put some numbers up on the screen. 5 states have seen at least a 35% increase in hospitalization since Memorial Day. And the CDC projects that deaths will jump from 115,000 now to between 124 and 140,000 by July 4th. How much of this do you attribute to states reopening and people easing up on social distancing? And do you think, when you see this increase in hospitalizations and deaths, that some states should consider pulling back on reopening?
Well, what we have to understand is that about 5% of the U.S. population has been infected to date with this virus, some locations slightly higher. This virus is not going to rest until it gets to about 60 or 70%. When I say rest, I mean just slow down. So one way or another, we're going to see a lot of additional cases out there. What the question we're asking ourselves right now, what does reopening do? What did the protests do? And I can give you examples where in some states like Arizona, the percentage of tests positive are going up substantially, suggesting it's not just a testing artifact, as you pointed out. Hospitalizations are going up. That surely is an indication. But it's not universally across the country. And we're at one of those moments right now where we have to understand what is actually happening. How much is the virus driving itself? Remember, in previous influenza pandemics, we saw waves. These were 2 to 3 months of cases that then would suddenly just literally almost disappear, go into a trough, which had nothing to do with a man-made activity, only to come back with a vengeance in a second wave several months later. So we're really at an inflection point right now, understanding. Do we think reopening is going to increase cases? It sure should. But we have examples of states where it hasn't. So I think this is where, again, we have to be very humble and say this is a very serious challenge, but we don't really know what is actually making the virus move like it is right now in some states and not in others.
Okay, so here's the key point on that. We're at 4 or 5% in the country in terms of people who have been tested and infected. According to his expertise, this thing isn't really going to die down on its own, even a little bit, until we get to 60%. So the question becomes, how fast do we allow ourselves to get to 60%? And if we shut down again, if we wear masks, if we wear gloves, whatever the case may be, how does that change that situation? Because if everybody wore a mask tomorrow, then, if you believe what they say about the mask protection, then all of the cases will begin to reduce. But they're not going to reduce to zero. And as soon as people stop wearing masks again, since we're not at that 60% threshold in terms of herd immunity, we're going to end up going through this all over again, which, from a business and economic point of view, is like getting whiplash. It goes away, we open up, sales start to go forward, economy starts to recover, surge, and then we start pulling back again. I'm not sure people can handle that financially. I don't think the economy can handle that. I'm not even sure people can handle that emotionally. It just doesn't seem like a tenable position to be in. So, which brings us back to probably what's going to have to do is we're going to have to kind of bite the bullet and focus less on how many people have COVID and more on who's catching it and what are the likelihood of dying from it. The younger you are, the likelihood of you dying from it is quite small. For some age groups, it's at this moment, it's less than if you got the flu, which is phenomenal. However, if it starts getting larger and people who are older start getting it again, then we could end up in a completely different situation than where we're at right now. Either way, we've got some hard times ahead for us economically here. Right now, the unemployment rate is in double digits. There's not much that the president can do until large portions of the economy are back to work and open up to about 75% or higher. And right now, with these orders for masks and other types of restrictions, they're putting roadblocks in the way of the economy getting restarted on even footing. That's going to do it for this segment. As always, if you have any questions or comments, just post them down below. I hope you will subscribe to the Business Intercept. The whole purpose of this channel is to look at the news, specifically business news, but as you can see, this social political situation with COVID kind of bleeds into the economy, and kind of, go over what that might mean for you and others on a Main Street type level. So hit the subscribe button, notification bell so that you know when new videos are being uploaded. And I look forward to you watching some more videos in the future.